Hello, good evening. I'm David Innes, a trustee of the Soldiers of Oxfordshire Museum. Welcome to the museum tonight. I hope that you are enjoying your visits to the museum, those of you who have managed to get here over recent months, and that some of you may have clocked that we have a new and very full exhibition in the Cloister Gallery of Second World War art. There's lots to see in these paintings, some of them which I think are very evocative. Tonight's talk is about the short campaign fought in the jungles of Sarawak and Borneo during the period 1963 to 1966, during the Indonesian-Malaysian Confrontation. David Roberts and Peter Chamberlin were young platoon officers in the 1st Green Jackets, at the time the successor battalion to the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, and so this is very much a conflict and county story for the museum. Jungle operations, I know, are difficult to imagine. I hope the talk will give you an idea of the kind of demands made upon young British soldiers by the climate and the terrain in which this story is set. We'd really welcome your donations. During the talk or in the live question and answer afterwards, you can make donations in one of two ways. Either click the red icon at the bottom right of the screen or text Borneo 70450 with a sum of £5, and that will get a little donation to us in that way as well. After the talk is finished, we'll be having a live question and answer when I'll be joined by these two young officers. Tonight, this is their story.
Good evening, and thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm delighted to be telling you this story with Peter Chamberlin here at the Soldiers of Oxfordshire Museum in Woodstock. I'm very conscious of the prestigious speakers who have covered many impressive and wide-ranging subjects before in this series of online talks. And tonight I humbly present you with a microscopic view of junior participants in a small war. Our subject is the experiences of young rifle platoon commanders on active service leading up to an ambush operation on the Indonesian border. This was in 1964, when the Beatles, miniskirts and Carnaby Street were much more the focus in the United Kingdom. David Innes persuaded us with his steely charm to talk about the ambush operations, which I commanded in the southwest of Sarawak in 1964. I'm delighted that Peter is with me because he and his platoon played an essential part in the nights in question. In true regimental family tradition, not only was he my great friend at Sandhurst, but subsequently has to suffer me as his brother-in-law. This action was a pinprick action compared to the later rigours of Iraq and Afghanistan, so I'm aware that there will be battle-hardened veterans listening, and I salute you. But even you might be amused at our small activities. Firstly, for those who might not know about the Indonesian confrontation from 1963 to 66, I will set the scene to give it some context. In 1962, the 1st Green Jackets, the successor regiment to the Oxfordshire Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, was starting a 3-year posting based in Penang in Malaya. There could not have been a more idyllic posting, and to quote a Second World War epithet from UK-based forces about Far East forces in the Second World War, quartered safe out here was seemingly true, but not for long. Christmas 62 saw the outbreak of the Brunei Revolt, and the regiment rapidly deployed there and for some months successfully quelled that revolt. That is a story for another day, and indeed it's a story well told in the museum's website. But it was the spark that lit the Indonesian confrontation. December 62 saw me in my final terms at Sandhurst, and hearing the regiment's exploits added huge excitement to my joining on active service out there. The grandeur of the passing out parade was soon a distant memory, as Peter Chamberlin and I were quickly deployed to Malaya and 5 days kitting out in Penang and then flown via Singapore to Brunei.
David, just remind us, if you would, why the hell were we there? Malaya, as it still was an independent nation. We were pulling back from the Far East, and thankfully Harold Wilson was keeping us out of Vietnam. So why this commitment?
Put simply, it was post-independent power play. Indonesia under Sukarno had ambitions to form a federation with him as the leader, containing Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia. Sukarno was furious at the intended formation of Malaysia, that is Malaya, Sarawak, Sabah, and Singapore, which was to come into being in September 63. Hence his attempts to stir insurrection in Brunei in December 62. Having failed in this enterprise, he determined to infiltrate and destabilize from his Kalimantan Borneo bases, bordering on Sabah and Sarawak, in order to achieve this ambition. So, through 1963, small-scale incursions started across the Borneo borders, a distance of 1,250 miles, mainly primary jungle. That is really thick, canopied trees with very little undergrowth. Those were allowed fairly easily a passage through there. On Merdeka Day, or otherwise known as Freedom Day, on September the 16th, two young newly commissioned subalterns made their way through celebrating crowds in Singapore to fly to Brunei. By this time, Malaysia had requested and been granted UK and Commonwealth nation military support to help defend this difficult border. I give this brief summary because it was important for us in the British forces at every level, particularly the jungle bashing, slogging riflemen, to understand the rationale and give a sense of purpose to their deployment. Enough of the geopolitics. A 20-year-old David Roberts arrived in Surya in Brunei to take on a scratch platoon, a delightful motley crew of mainly Cockneys, Scousers and Oxen Bucks, and as yet without a platoon sergeant. You will note I have not mentioned my attendance on a jungle warfare course. That's simply because I never went on one before or after my time in the Far East. In a funny way, my avoidance of the inevitable conditioning that would have created may have helped in keeping my mind open to experimentation in the ensuing months. This started my September 63 to December 63 tour in Borneo. For me and the platoon, now joined by the excellent Sergeant Bernie Walker, it was the steepest of learning curves. Most varied, exciting, and for 2 months, never seeing my company commander or fellow greenjackets. I tell you this because I do not believe the outcome of the ambush action would have been the same without this opportunity to build a team of 28 who trusted each other, who knew each other's skills, and felt on a level with the jungle. We had done extensive night ambushing without contact in the teak plantations near Tawa in Sabah and on Sabatic Island, which I have to say was the hottest place I've ever been and ever will be in. Although we had no actual engagements with the enemy, there were enough near misses and excitement and hard soldiering to keep us busy.
So, to the battalion's third tour and our second in Borneo. This tour began in early June 1964 in Sarawak's 1st Division, and let me show you on this excellent sketch. Here's Kuching to the north, Indonesia and Borneo to the south. I spent the first 6 weeks with my 7th platoon attached to A Company in Padawan, which is an area to the southeast. A comfortable base near the border where we actively patrolled, but without any contacts. This was a very useful time to get acclimatized, fit, and jungle aware. In mid-July, B Company concentrated to move to the Bao sector, where we took over from the Gurkhas. There were 3 platoon bases, 5 platoon under Christopher Myers in Bucket Knuckle, 6 platoon Richard Hume Rothery in Surikin, and myself in Stas. There was a single 105mm pack howitzer from 70 battery at Surikin, which could cover both Bucket Knuckle and Stas with fire. We were reinforced with a 3-inch mortar, a single mortar, a general purpose machine gun, and even dug a position for a mobile anti-tank gun should it be allocated. It never was. Intelligence suggested that enemy attacks were imminent in the area, and we all set about reinforcing our positions, mostly by digging accommodation underground and installing overhead cover. I spent the best part of 2 days in a helicopter OP, registering gun and mortar defensive fire targets, including the magic DF-SOS you may have heard of, which was subsequently fired in the action, the first we believe since Korea. Bucket Knuckle was duly attacked on both the 18th and the 23rd of July, and there was news that Stas would be attacked on the 28th or 29th. David, what happened?
Well, my platoon were deployed forward to Stas from Kuching to lay ambushes on tracks leading across the border from Stas, a distance of about 1,500 yards. The Stas fort was near a village school and village, so the villagers had free movement until 6 in the evening when curfew was imposed, thus making it very difficult to do detailed daylight reconnaissance. In the Stas base, we rehearsed each rifleman's position and task and practiced the connecting cords and signals. It was essential that everybody knew each other's role in this operation. For myself, blindfolded myself in a dark corner and practiced the way to trigger the ambush. I'll now show you the very basic Heath Robinson activities that we had to live with in those times. Many of you listening will know and have heard of the Claymore mine, which has extensively by then been used by the Americans in Vietnam. We weren't so lucky. This would have made a huge difference to this operation. Instead, we had extensive D10 communication wire into which I tied fuses, having taken the grenade fuses and the trigger mechanism away, taped them in to the bottom of the grenade, and every 10 foot or so connected up 8 grenades in what is known as a grenade necklace. The same applied also to RAF flares, which they used to light aircraft landing spots. Again, I was using D10 wire and connected to all of it, which is why I needed to practice it in the dark, into an A41 battery, and I tied the bad ends of the D10 wire and practiced with a matchstick lashed to it so I could find the hole. And once I put it in there, that set the whole lot off. The chances of that happening, I have to say, I put well below 50%, but it was the only way to do it. I was also questioned as to why we didn't use tripwires. Trip flares were a waste of time in the jungle because there were too many wild animals in the secondary jungle in which we were operating, which was full of undergrowth. At 6 p.m. on the 28th of July, just after last light, I left with a laying out party of 4 men. Our task was to select a site for our ambush and lay panji beds and grenade necklaces and RAF flares. Panji beds were sharpened bamboo poles with poison on the end, which you put to one side of the killing area in order to catch anybody running to the side. Sergeant Walker brought up the main party of about 20 and positioned the single Bren gunner and other groups, and we settled down and we waited and we waited and we waited, and it rained and it rained and it rained. It was monsoon. It was the same the next night, the 29th. So we were asked, very politely, if we would go out again on the third night. And nobody demurred to that. And there was deep disappointment from the 2 riflemen who had to be stood down because they had coughs. The third night followed the same pattern. But I decided to change the position, which I can describe from this sketch. There is the Stas base. There were several tracks leading in. There were more than I'm indicating here. Distance from the border was 1,500 meters, and we moved out. So this is a distorted picture. We moved out 1,000 meters. The first 2 nights, I had ambush positions slightly up this other track there. But I decided on the third night that we needed to cover more of the possibilities of getting 2 tracks coming into one position, which, as you could see, given that we were expecting to be outnumbered by any Indonesian party, because we were only 20 or just over 20, we adopted a all-round defensive ambush position with the main killer group pointing into this killer group here. That was the main Bren gun. The grenade necklaces I put round there, and also I put the flowers there, and Corporal Gibson sighted the panji beds there. Once we were laid down there, I also had pre-planned, and everybody knew that we had an RV position just short and slightly up a mounted hill. This was because the Indonesians, who are now much more professional in their attacks, led by regular Indonesian troops, and they had much better trained militia, who were in the habit of, if they were ambushed, their large numbers were enough to turn back and attack ambush positions, and the Gurkhas had had some experience of that elsewhere. So we devised a system of pulling back to a tight RV, and that really was the layout for the third night. I think probably it is best now to go back to my day at the memory of the following action. But firstly, I want to hand over to Peter, because we settled down and we were prepared for another long wait. And long wait it was as the night wore on. I hand over to Peter.
I'm going to quote from the diary I wrote the following day, and here it is. I wrote as follows: 363 days after commissioning, and without the benefit of either a platoon commander's or a jungle warfare course, came my baptism of fire. I was asleep at 2:30 in the morning of the 31st of July, having waited up on full alert until 1:15, by which time we anticipated an attack that night was probably off. when our peace was suddenly shattered by a deafening outburst of fire. Rushing from the command post to see what was going on, I nearly had my head taken off by a 2-inch mortar illuminating flare fired by my platoon sergeant, the famous Dodger Green. Thereafter, a feeling of exhilaration and euphoria as we riddled every conceivable hiding place with fire, including, allegedly, some 3,000 rounds from our newest toy, the general purpose machine gun, plus 3-inch mortar fire, interestingly fired from our mortar section using a helmet as a base plate in order to reduce the range to 80 meters so that we can engage anyone on our perimeter wire. This mortar was soon completely buried. I suspect the firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, although it seemed much longer. But it was soon obvious that enemy fire was far too high and therefore ineffective. I was thrilled by the discipline of the riflemen and the effectiveness of our own fire. The enemy soon broke off and withdrew. When the din ceased, we watched and waited. We had no casualties, and everyone was on a high. And then at about 4:10, the amazing sound of 11 platoon opening up and the excitement of relaying fire control orders to the gun at Sarikin via Bao. Now let's see what was happening down the track.
Right. I'm going to read from my account nearer the time, as it was 60 years ago. I think it's testing my memory too much. But it was a very dark night and not raining at last. So it was very startling when at 2:30 a sudden and tremendous firefight started at Stas. I'd sighted our ambush, as I have already explained, on a Y junction. The pyrotechnic show from Stas was magnificent. After it died down, our thoughts turned to the remote chance of the enemy using the track back behind to the border. I had almost given up hope when at 4:12 we heard footsteps and whispered chatter and saw a pencil torch. Clearly they were coming round the rear of our position and would then turn into the killing area that I've shown you. Absolute silence and steadiness was essential, and was delivered. Time seemed endless. One rifleman later explained his steadiness as rigid with fear. I counted more than 20 enemy, and when I felt that the last of them were clear of our rear group and there was a solid body of them in the killing area, I sprung the ambush. Flares, grenades, and small arms fire shattered the night. Very accurate Bren fire from Rifleman Maltby and Lewis killed those in the centre, while others died when they ran into exploding grenade necklaces. There was some fire returned, and Rifleman Khan was unfortunately hit by an Armalite ricochet. As I expected, the leading part of the enemy, who had passed through the area before I detonated the ambush to counterattack, I pulled the platoon back quickly to the prearranged RV I have shown you, where we could more easily resist any assault. I then called down artillery fire on the ambush site and onto the border track. The first 2 rounds exploded, unfortunately, in the trees almost above our heads, which called for some very speedy signal work by Lance Corporal Gibson. Dawn enabled us to move forward again and search the debris, which was done very thoroughly and professionally, revealing 4 bodies. This score later increased to 6, with 5 more enemy killed, enemy wounded, and we subsequently think that 9 were missing. I thought it also worth to get another view of the experience that night from Rifleman Peter Uden.
I was with Rifleman Bailey in the right-hand cut-off group beside a small hut at the track junction. At about 4 o'clock, I heard footsteps splashing in the muddy track behind me and low voices talking excitedly. They seemed to take forever to pass. I could hear some people in the killing area whilst there were still others behind me. I had a slightly panicking thought that if the ambush was sprung now, we would be surrounded. I remember trying to hold my breath in case the enemy heard my breathing. All this did was to increase the pounding in my heart until I felt sure they would hear that. Then the platoon commander sprung the ambush. The noise was terrific. By the light of the flares I could see movement, and I fired a full SLR magazine. When the flares died down, the firing ceased. Shortly after this, the platoon commander called us back and called down artillery fire. After dawn, we returned to the ambush area, which we cleared, and then took the bodies back to the platoon base. I remember that as we went through the perimeter wire, the commanding officer, Colonel David House, was standing there with a big grin on his face. He shook hands with each one of us as we went past.
So, after the ambush, we regrouped back at the Stas Fort, and I then took a small follow-up group to join the recce platoon commanded by Mark Grace Dickens, who had been ordered to order a follow-up group, and we sped off towards the border. Really, probably we went a little bit over the border in the hope of catching wounded enemy stragglers who may be left behind. We found nothing. I frankly think some local friendly E-bands got there rather before us. From then to the end of our tour, the forts were left alone, and we heard that Indonesian morale was very low, and in particular as we'd killed one officer, a regular officer and regular sergeant, and 4 privates of the Indonesian Regular Army.
David was very rightly awarded the Military Cross for this action. Sergeant Walker was mentioned in dispatches, as was Rifleman Khan, who was the only injury, sadly of a ricochet, believed to be from an Armalite. I have here the citation, most of which we've already covered as part of the action, but I would like to read to you the closing paragraph. Subsequently, Lieutenant Roberts' platoon was unanimous in praising his conduct throughout the engagement. His disregard for his own safety, his calm and able leadership, and his skill and meticulous attention to detail in planning and mounting this successful ambush were all of a very high order. He set an inspiring example. What a night!
Yes, what a night.
The question and answer session will start shortly. The Q&A window will open below the video window. Please log in to ask a question.
Welcome back to the live question and answer. And I'm delighted to say, by David Roberts and Peter Chamberlin to answer your questions about their talk just now on this ambush that night in July 1964. A hairy time, if ever there was one, for these 2 young officers. I'm delighted to tell you that I've got the first question here, which is about cross-border operations, which you mentioned in your opening, David. It's from Henry Spielberg, who's one of our trustees. I'm pleased to say you're watching, Henry. And he wants to know really how cross-border operations were, how were they mounted, and were they approved, as it were, at this stage in the campaign?
At this stage of the campaign, most definitely not approved. In fact, we were instructed not to go across the border. The border was very, very ill-defined, so I have to say that by mistake, we may well have wandered over, but it was only in the next year, Operation Claret, which moved on to major operations, and certainly the 2nd Battalion, the Green Jackets, were able to go much further over the border. But it was definitely a restriction for us.
This is an important thing, because you were very close to the border. You were operating very close to the border, and you must have been pretty more or less aware where it was.
No.
It was.
There wasn't a barbed wire fence.
No,
the
exactly.
only place I knew there was a border was in Sabbatic Island in the previous tour, where there was a barbed wire fence, and you actually knew it was there,
Yeah.
dividing the island.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you very much indeed for that. I've got a question here about Rifleman Cowan. You mentioned Rifleman Cowan as your only casualty that night, fortunately, from Vanessa Cameron. And she asks about what happened to him. What were his injuries, actually? How did you get him out of there? And presumably, hopefully, he survived a long time subsequently.
We'll start at the end. He survived and went back to the battalion, and all was well.
Good.
Except, I think, and I'm not sure, Rifleman Cowan, whether he's still got the Armalite bullet sitting, as it was very close to his lung, and I know it was going to be difficult to get it out. The answer is that his behaviour was exemplary. He walked back with the wound, having been treated by Sergeant Walker, and in fact helped clear the ambush site early in the morning before we went back to the base. And he, like I have to say, all the rest of the platoon, behaved in the most wonderful way and were thoroughly professional throughout.
That must have been a wonderful thing, having gone through an operation like that, when actually it was pretty dangerous. In an ambush position like that, very real possibility of hitting each other, quite apart from being dealt a blow by the enemy.
Yes, you've got to remember that you're lying down on the ground in undergrowth, which is why the all-round position, at least you knew if everybody fired out that they weren't going to hit anyone in the middle.
No.
But we did have a small cut-off group as well, where Rifleman Newton would. And we had, certainly in sighting that, we had to be very careful that everybody knew who was where. But in the excitement, I'm glad to say nobody moved, because you are vulnerable.
The discipline that night amongst your chaps must have been exemplary.
As I say, it was.
David, did you come through the whole tour with your complete platoon?
Regrettably not. On the last day of our tour, some months or so later, when we were in fact clearing, I had then moved to the other base that Peter pointed out, Bucket Knuckle, and we were required to remove IEDs that had been placed by us around the bases. I think practically everybody had them. And in the process of doing that, very sadly, one of the explosions was faulty. The fuse must have gone, and it killed Rifleman Saunders and Rifleman Hunt, which was a tragic blow for my platoon right at the end of the tour, having been so successful.
That would have been. The IEDs were made of what? Because these were your defensive
explosives connected to a fuse and sometimes put in bamboos with nasty bits put in them.
Yeah. What a tragic way for you to end. However, let's move on to our questions here. Peter Garner has come in with a question. You mentioned friendly Iban. What were your relations with the local Iban and Sarawak Malays?
I'll let Peter perhaps answer on locally on Stas, because he was very near the village. But generally, wherever I'd been, and my previous platoon position had been up the one of the big long rivers in the 3rd Division at Nangagat, and most of our task was making us visiting longhouses and generally hearts and minds is the operation, as it's always called. So we never ever had, to my knowledge, anything other than support from them, but Peter may have a more local view.
Yeah, I think this is very important, that we got to know and get the trust of the people of Stas in particular. And the way we did that is we employed a number of the girls to do our washing for us, and a huge number of the men to do the reinforcing of our positions. They did all the digging and all the real hard spade work. And of course the other thing was that when we needed to, we could impose a curfew so that we could do in my case, OP firing to establish DF positions. And they had to stay at home, and they were quite happy to do that. But they were amazingly friendly and a lovely lot of people. Of course, they were also very good scouts, and we used them on patrols to make sure we didn't get lost or cross the border, which I'm sure we may have done.
Well, you mentioned getting lost. I should think map reading, getting around in the jungle, was pretty difficult.
It was an art. The only thing we had on our maps really was the rivers, of which there were lots, and the contours. And I do remember one of the first map reading exercises I did at Sandhurst was contours only. And I thought, goodness me, please, never again. And here we were trying it again. Just imagine today's young soldier who knows where he is on Salisbury Plain, which we never knew. So difficult map reading.
In fact, one of the first patrols I went out in the first tour, I was handed a map, and in large letters across it, the area I was supposed to be going was no topographical information available.
I can imagine. Going back to the EBAN point, which we were touching on earlier, one of the photographs showed a rifleman on some steps leading up to a house. Presumably there was some sort of hearts and minds effort going on as well, and conducted by the battalion.
A lot of our patrolling was hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Particularly when I was with A Company earlier in the tour, and we would stay the night in longhouses where they looked after us, dare I say, tremendously well.
Yeah.
And it was a successful hearts and minds operation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. You mentioned, one of the questions has just come in here. You mentioned that there was a registration of defensive fire tasks. You glossed over it, and when the time, your talk was, you went over it pretty quickly, but David called for some fire to get him out of a spot of bother. How were you confident that it was going to come down in the right place?
I spent about 2 days in a helicopter, and I'm trying to remember the detail of how we did it, because from the air it's very difficult to identify the targets, which in most cases were track junctions from which you could correct. But I suspect we probably marked them in the trees with torn up bits of parachute in the tree above a track junction so we could see it from the air. And we did actually fire those targets and made the necessary corrections and recorded them. And one of them was the defensive fire SOS, DFSOS, which when Corporal Gibson first called up on the radio, I pressed the necessary button and it fired, and it was embarrassingly accurate, and we had to add 400 repeat, which is a well-known gunner cry.
Very good. I hope there'll be some gunners listening tonight who will confirm whether it's a well-known gunner cry or not. But the indirect fire support available to you was very important. You mentioned one of the other questions that's come in from Fiona. She talks about, you mentioned the 3-inch mortar base plate getting buried. That is fairly meaningless to the average non-military person.
Okay, well, the 3-inch mortar has a maximum range of, I'm trying to remember, between 5,000 and 6,000 metres, I would think, which is wonderful. But hopeless in this situation, where what we wanted to do was just lob HE grenades over the wire. And we could have done this with 2-inch mortar had we had HE grenades, but we didn't. We only used the 2-inch mortar for power-illuminating flares, which fluttered in the sky for about 40 seconds. So the way to get our own mortar fire onto the perimeter fence, which was between 80 and 100 yards away, was to reduce the power of the fuses, and I can't remember what you fitted to the end of a mortar, but there were various strengths of fuse. Remove all that, put the base of the mortar in a steel helmet so that it was balanced, and then slide the mortar down the tube, which automatically fires it. And indeed, they just plopped over the fence. But of course, a helmet is not a proper base plate, and it couldn't withstand the pressure for very long, and it gradually buried itself. So we couldn't really direct the fire particularly, but we could still fire it. And I think it was quite a factor in the particular area of the perimeter that we aimed at, where we knew most of the enemy were. And I'm pretty sure it was very effective.
Very good. Excellent, thank you. Colin Kay. You remember Colin Kay?
I remember Colin Kay. He's unforgettable.
I think we all remember Colin Kay from the Light Infantry. He says, did you come across the Border Scouts commanded by John Cross? Is that a name that means anything to you? Which we had in the 4th Division to assist them. He must have been there a bit later, or...
No, the Border Scouts were, I'm pretty sure that we all had them supporting us.
Yeah.
He may be referring when they were more of a unified fighting force, I think, but I'm not dead sure. But certainly Peter referred to the Scouts and our use of the Scouts.
Yeah.
And they were very good.
Excellent, thank you. I've got a question here from Wilbur. Wilbur and Rex ask, how well did the grenade traps work? Now, grenade traps, presumably these are the necklaces. You look as if you might know who Wilbur and Rex are.
Wilbur and Rex, hello. I knew you were going to do something like this.
His grandchildren.
I thought they might be.
They are my grandson. Well, I'll show you. I did show on the film as well. If you take off the pin out of a grenade, the what's this called?
Pass.
Comes off, and you take the
spring, I suppose.
Yes, you take the grenade fuse out, and you put another different type of fuse in, which is connected, Wilbur and Rex, to this bit of wire that goes back to that battery, and then I wrap it up with black tape it onto the thing, and there it is hanging on there, and the wire then carries on to the next grenade, and we had 8 of those linked. And if possible, I used to try and put the grenades just above the ground rather than them lying on the ground, if I could find a little bamboo or something like that. And then I went back and we lay, as I've explained in the film, and I hoped that when I put the bit of wire into the battery that everything would go bang. I hope that answers your question.
Complicated this, because you're setting it up in the dark.
Semi-dark.
Semi-dark, so twilight, let's say. Yeah. Not easy nonetheless.
No torches.
No, exactly.
No.
I hope your grandpa has answered your question, Wilbur. Rex? The next question is an anonymous question from... anonymous. Was there any questioning of the Commonwealth forces helping Malaysia, as it had just got independence at the time? Did you help to train the Malaysians to defend themselves? Were you involved in anything like that?
We worked alongside the Malaysians. Personally, I don't think regimentally we were involved in actual training. We were
not at our level.
No.
Not at our level. We were deployed.
No. Okay. Thank you for that. Charles Bromhead. Remember that name?
Yes.
What sort of pre-deployment training did you receive? I think you said none.
None.
I was very lucky in that my platoon, most ably commanded by Robert Drummond Hay, who I hope is watching, had been the demonstration platoon at the Jungle Warfare School in Johor Bahru, based from Penang. That was before my time. So I took over the best oiled machine I could possibly have had, and only one person didn't know what he was doing, and that was me.
Okay. Charles Bromhead asked another question here. Yes, will there be a recording of this? I'd like to be able to share it with the current 2 Rifles Officers' Mess. I'm delighted to hear you say that, Charles. Yes, all our talks are recorded, and all our talks are available. There are about between 15 and 18 of them now, I think, on the Soldiers of Oxfordshire Museum website. And this one will be available as a recording on the museum website from tomorrow. And I'd be delighted if you would show it more widely as you see fit. That is excellent news. I've got another question here, really, about health in the jungle. You were living in a pretty hostile environment in comparison to where British troops normally operate. What was it like? in terms of health and in terms of looking after yourself? Was there, for example, a malaria threat and so on?
Yes, there was. There were very strict disciplines. You really had to make sure that people stuck by them, which was taking malaria pills every day. And the other was be very careful with the water you drank. And if you you would put one of the pills that you put into the water to purify them. And you were working in an intensely humid atmosphere. And I think it was the monsoon time, well, it was, the amount of rain, and your clothes never got dry. The other health factor, and important in this particular action, was that we'd been out for 2 solidly wet nights. You have to be awake the whole time.
Yeah.
We were connected with ropes, which we were not ropes, with wire, which we were able to keep nudging each other along, and we had signals for that. And you had to make sure that people got some sleep during the day, which is never that easy. There was quite a lot going on in Peter's staff space. So in question of tiredness was important. But on the whole, we had fit young men. We were...
Exactly.
And we just had to be very careful. My nearest experience with death was that the scout in front of me disturbed a hornet's nest on a patrol in the previous tour, and I got stung, I think, about eight times. I was unconscious for at least 24 hours. Oh
my God.
It was many years later I finally had an anaphylactic reaction, but I was quite lucky not to have one at the time.
Yeah, indeed. Leeches, snakes, and that kind
Yeah,
of thing?
plenty of them.
Yeah.
But you didn't pull a leech off. You burnt it off, or put salt on it. So those became to some extent second nature.
Yeah.
We were both spotty lads, and spots never recovered in humidity. You came back looking like a goodness knows
attractive.
What. Attractive.
Yes. You got prickly heat, was extremely uncomfortable in the thing, and actually the best cure for prickly heat was to strip off naked and stand in the rain, and the rain relieved that itchiness that you got.
Because the rain was hard, and it acted as a salve, I guess. Yeah.
I think there's one other, not to do so much with health, but it's the adrenaline that flows in this thing. Peter mentioned about the fight, and that was 10 minutes. I've had plenty of time ever since the day. I would have thought I'd been in that ambush, that it had taken at least 5 minutes. I reckon actually it was 30 seconds from the start that I put the fuses alive to set the ambush to the time I said cease fire.
On that, the firing of the grenade necklaces must have been, you must have practiced it somewhere else to make sure you...
As I explained in the film, I did it in the dark. Well, I blindfolded myself. Did
you ever see them go off
I did a test.
Training? You did?
No, well, I did it personally. Yeah. We didn't go anywhere to be trained in it.
No. You made it up as you went along, sort of thing.
Heath Robinson played a big part in all this.
Take a brief pause here just to remind our viewers that we are very anxious to receive your donations for this talk tonight. I know I bang on about this from time to time, and I hope you won't mind that. But the fact is that we are dependent upon the donations of the public and the fee-paying public to come to the museum for admission fees and so on for our funds. And your donations tonight will make all the difference to us in telling stories like this. So I hope you will not hold back, and that you will take advantage of the opportunities to donate, either, as I said, by the text method I mentioned, or by the red icon at the bottom right of your screen. Thanks very much for that. Back to the questions. I've got a question here from Charlie Pack. Anybody know Charlie Pack?
Yeah.
I know Charlie Pack. Charlie Pack was in the light infantry and a helicopter pilot himself. Could you let us know who was in overall control and your adjacent units? That's an interesting one. Were you aware, left and right?
Funnily enough, I wasn't aware who was to my right. It must have been another unit. But Our boundaries were pretty strict in Stas. We patrolled between Surikin on the left and I can't remember on the right, but I don't remember ever dealing with them. On the other hand, we reported very definitely back to Bao, company headquarters, Michael Coe, and he was a regular visitor and a tremendous supporter of all that we were doing.
Yes, well, I was in reserve back in Kuching, actually, but having been much further up in a different part, in the much wilder primary jungle up the river. I think it was the River Rajang or Bali.
Yes, the Rajang, where that was the southernmost, wasn't it? The Rajang?
No, it was Bali, actually. I think the River Bali.
Yeah.
At Nangagat, and that was a very different country. But you didn't really. It was a platoon commander's war in those days. You didn't really bother whether who was even next to you as a platoon, almost.
Although on this night it was important, wasn't it?
Well, I was working with him.
Yeah, exactly. Good, thank you very much, Charlie. I hope that helps. Peter Garner has come in with a second question, which is excellent. About small arms that you were carrying, the small arms you were carrying. Were your small arms suitable for close-quarter jungle engagements? You mentioned, for example, or Peter Uden, I think it was, mentioned he fired an SLR magazine, which would have been 20 rounds, or probably 18 rounds, maybe. And how did their performance compare to those of the enemy? Did you have any
as far as
way of comparing the two?
It's difficult to compare, but I know they were armed with Armalites. Certainly, that was their main weapon, I think. We had the much heavier SLR, which was not really suitable. We did use, normally front scouts had Browning shotguns, 5-shot automatic shotgun. We were in this ambush still using the Bren gun, although Peter by then in his base had just got the GPMG. And the lack of equipment, I highlighted it by saying that ambush would have been far more successful if we'd had Claymore mines, which, as I say, were in regular use in Vietnam then. This the second tour, I think, the third tour, and into well into 65, people were getting the Claymore mine in common use. I wish we'd had it that night.
And you knew that it was available somewhere, but you were unable to get your hands on it.
We certainly knew it was coming.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. I got probably getting towards the end of this now, but I got one more question really, which was about the come in here. Another one from Henry Spielberg, about fire control orders, because communications is a difficult thing in the jungle. You made that point. The relaying of fire control orders from you in the ambush position to the gun saying, I need fire now. Can you just talk us through that for a little bit?
Well, I think Peter will probably rarely tell the full story, but from my point of view, I needed to be able to talk to the gun position, but I couldn't. Peter was my lifeline and did a very good job. I called down the fire, he passed it on. Once we got the initial accuracy right, my ambition was for Peter to direct the fire along the track up to the border, just to see if we could chase them back over the border with fire.
Yeah.
I've got no idea whether they managed to do that, but that's what I hope to do. But I had to leave it very much, and Peter will explain how on earth he managed to break through, because there was a very difficult communication.
So before going to Peter, you weren't aware of any of that fire going further south on that track towards the border?
Yes, we heard it.
You heard it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good.
Yes, David had an A41, which is one up from the A40, which is virtually a
The
telephone.
A41 was the battery that you saw in the film.
Indeed. Yeah.
So the A41, he and I could communicate. I had a C42 on the company net back to Bao, which in theory could also reach Surikin direct. I'm not sure with the mountain range, not mountain, hill range in between, that we actually could speak direct to 6th Platoon, but they could probably hear us. And I assumed I was talking to Bow and they would relay it forward. If there was, and I'm sure there was, a very sharp gunner at Surikin, he could have picked that up direct. Otherwise, it had to come down his chain. So there could have been 3 or 4 consecutive relays, which obviously is a time delay. But I gave my corrections from where I thought David was. So I would say add 500 from his position, not from mine. Yeah. But then, of course, he moved, and whether I could remember where he got to, I'm not sure. So there was, dare I say it, a degree of confusion, but the end result was more than satisfactory.
Probably a good place to draw this to a close. We might just talk about the artillery side of it for a moment, because this story, your telling of this story, has excited quite a lot of interest amongst the Royal Artillery, archivists, museum people, and so on, in trying to identify the battery and who was where in all this, and the kind of gun that you had. Did you know the kind of gun you had?
105. A light 105.
Yeah.
Our portable.
Yeah, I think so. It's been an interesting exercise because lots of batteries have battle honours attached to their number, and they're known as 70-something battery. But this battery doesn't have a number for whatever reasons. Their gunners have got an answer for this. But this battery particularly lasted only a short time more after this operation. It was probably its last operational deployment and was eventually disbanded. Actually, I discovered that George Truell had been one of the battery commanders in the past and took the close down parade of the battery. Do you remember George Truell?
Very well, yeah.
We all remember him at Camberley, don't we?
Yes.
Magnificent man. Well, I think we should draw this evening to a close now and let you off the hook. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for giving us our talk tonight and for answering so many questions, which have been most interesting to listen to, and I hope it generates lots more interest as time goes on. We find with these talks that although we might get more viewers tonight, and that will become available or become obvious to Clive in looking at his statistics tonight or tomorrow, and more maybe by the end of the week, with any luck, we'll have a few more people having watched it as well. It's a remarkable story and a very good testament, I think, to what young officers did, thrown in at the deep end, but what the British soldier did, actually,
absolutely.
in a pretty unforgiving environment and climate and difficult times. And it was a long time ago, and it's very good of you both to dredge your memories for the talk tonight. I'm very grateful to you. And I'm going to present you with our standard prize, which is a copy of this, which is Simon Harris's History of the 52nd Light Infantry in the Great War. Now, there's little read across exactly from this book directly to the operations that you've been talking about. But I would say that the chaps in this book would have been very proud of your performance in 1964, had they known about it. Simon Harris wrote this book because of the chap behind me, Ralph Kite, his nephew, who was killed in the Battle of the Somme in 1916, and had a very difficult time of it. And in the process of writing this book about his nephew, his great uncle, I should say, his great uncle, he discovered that there was no history of the 52nd in the Great War, which was an astonishing thing. And so he wrote this. And it's a remarkable piece of work. And I do urge you, when it arrives, I'm not going to give you a copy now, because I haven't got one to give you here, but I will have, and it'll be in the post to you shortly. It's a remarkably well-told story. And because it wasn't written until the 1990s, it has the benefit of the internet behind the researcher who dug up all the information, and it's in a league of its own, I would say, in comparison to most Great War histories. I hope you enjoy it, and you've done a great deal to earn it, I think. And you'll be glad to know that Wilbur has come in with a little remark here saying, "We're very proud, Grandpa." Well done, Wilbur.
Lovely.
So we'll come to an end now, and thank you both very much indeed for that. Thank you all for tuning in tonight, for listening in to our talk tonight. Thank you very much for your donations. I'm very grateful to you on behalf of the Soldiers of Oxfordshire Museum for thinking of us. And please keep those coming. My goodness me, they make all the difference to us. You will have picked up, because there was no flyer, there was no bit of film at the beginning of the evening to say that we had a sponsor tonight. So we have had to fund this talk ourselves in the museum, and we don't like doing that. It's a good story, and we're pleased to have done it on this occasion, but we need sponsorship. And if people watching tonight have any ideas about corporate organisations to which they might be attached, or they know somebody who might be in a corporate organisation who could help with this, please put them in touch with us, because it makes all the difference to us to have the films funded for us, and then we can benefit from the donations, which is much appreciated. Clive Smith, behind all the instrumentation, very close by here. A big thank you to you, our expert filmmaker. And to David and Peter, well done indeed. Thank you both very much indeed. We're also very grateful to others, actually, some friends and regimental contacts who searched for images and photographs to help with the illustration of this talk. And I might mention Dick and Dione Johnson, who were actually both in Sarawak at the time doing voluntary service overseas when you were there. Simon Booth Mason of the Green Jackets and Mike Walsh. The Royal Green Jackets Museum, Christine Pullen, thank you very much for your help in Winchester. And Nick Blaker, also Peter's son. Peter was with you in Borneo at the time, I know, but Nick Blaker also searched for images from his father's collection, and thank you for that. A big thank you especially to Ken Gray for doing Peter Euden's voiceover. That was immaculate. Ken, thank you very much indeed. But in the background, I mentioned the Royal Artillery, and we had lots of Royal Artillery interest in this, and I'd like to mention Chris Wilson, Charles Holden, Clive Fletcher-Wood, James Gower, Shane Rutter-Jerome, George Correa, Michael Phillips, and Sean Mogridge from the museum. Thank you all very much indeed for digging about and helping out with information and with images. That's most helpful. To give you a look forward, our next talk is about T.E. Lawrence. Yes, Lawrence of Arabia himself, on Tuesday the 18th of April, it's about 3 weeks from now, and it'll be delivered by Brigadier Hugh Willing, a regimental friend and accomplished historian himself. The family, the Lawrence family, lived in Oxford. The boy, Thomas, went to the high school and later to Balliol, so he's very much in our frame as a soldier of Oxfordshire. And the evening will be hosted by one of our trustees, Henry Spilberg. You've heard a question from him tonight. And so that will be on the Tuesday, the 18th of April. Thank you again very much indeed for watching. Hope to see you again soon. In the meantime, good night.